Okay, if you just joined us, I've just started a poll, so if you get a chance, fill that out, and then we can have a look at it in a few minutes. All right, interesting.
Done.
See some familiar faces on this call. Good to see you guys. We've got Minnow, you're on the panel. Jeff, we have Mark, Mila, you guys are here. Michelle, great to see you. Catherine, John, hey guys. Krista. All right. Welcome everybody. If you could all just hit mute, that'll make things a little bit easier for us. I don't want to have to press the mute all button. If you could hit mute, that would be great. If you want, if you just want to go on the speaker view, this is probably going to be the best way to experience the call. You'll be able to see the speaker on the main screen. Okay. Right, hi everyone. You can all hear me okay? Works? I'm Corey. I'm the director of the Center for Faith and Work at Redeemer. I just wanted to welcome you all. Thanks for being on the call. We've never done this virtually before, so bear with us. These kinds of things are becoming the new normal. So as I said before, we usually have these in person. So instead of going around the room is what we usually do, for those of you who are here before, I've sent out a poll. So if you haven't had a chance to fill that out, just fill that out for me. And I'll close it in a couple minutes and we can come back to it and we'll see who's on the call, the industries you guys work in and what part of the city you live in and what church you go to. We can all see the results. I don't know if you guys can see the live results yet, but you'll be able to see them in a minute. I'll close it in a couple minutes. We can come back to it. So just a few logistical points for tonight. We want to make this as interactive as possible. I know that's kind of tricky with these Zoom calls, but we'll have a whole bunch of sort of breaks for you guys to ask questions. So we'll have a few Q&A sessions. And so please just unmute your mic, throw out your question. We want to have as much interaction from you all as possible. If we don't get a chance to get to your question, you can either put it in the chat and we'll download the chat, right? And we can, we'll get to them later. And then if we don't get a chance to get to them, you can always email us at gotham@redeemer.com. And then we'll respond to you in the next couple of days. So just want to make sure everyone gets a chance to ask their questions. Again, if you're not currently muted, if you could mute, that would be great. And I think the better experience that you'll have is probably if you go to speaker view instead of the grid view, and then you'll be able to see whoever's speaking at the moment, have a better view of the call. You should have all received an email before this call. And a couple of things on the email. There is the brochure, this, a quick overview of the program. So that's really simple, self-explanatory. There's a sample calendar on there. So that's the calendar from last year. We're working on finalizing the new calendar, but it's essentially the same sort of overview of the program. Similar dates. We have 3 retreats and we have the Saturday sessions on there. We have about 26, 27 classes or so. There's a document on there with the application process, so that just runs you through everything you need to know about applying. There's a sample devotional in there, so that's really just a sample of what we would usually do on one of the retreats or one of the Saturday sessions, just to give you a taste of what it looks like to take part in a sort of a spiritual formation exercise, one of the ones that we would do. There's also just a selection of readings. It just gives you an idea of the kinds of books that we read. Those are sort of the key texts that we use. So that's just sort of to give you a sense of the kind of books we read, who we read. So that was all in the email. If you have questions about that, let me know. Just a really quick overview of the night. Let me just do this real quick. So at about 7:20, we'll have a panel of pastors. So that'll be Mark and Mila and Jeff from downtown, east side, and west side. They're going to introduce themselves, tell you a little bit about their role at Redeemer and just their role with Gotham and CFW. And then we'll have some time for an alumni panel. We have about 3 alums or current fellows who are just going to answer some questions and share about their experience. And then we'll have an opportunity for you also to ask them some questions. And then we'll have a period of time for like an open Q&A that you can ask any of us, any questions you have about the application process, about the program, any questions you have, that's an open time. And then we have Dr. Vince Baker with us from Wheaton College. So what we wanted to do as part of this, instead of being in person and having the opportunity to mingle and chat and hear from you guys and interact, we thought we want to take the opportunity to actually give you a bit of a taste of what a typical Gotham class might feel like. So Dr. Baycode is actually currently teaching this week's class. And so he taught yesterday for the Sunday session, and he'll be teaching tomorrow night for the Tuesday session. So what we asked him to do is come and give sort of an abridged version of that talk, or he's going to sort of speak into our moment a little bit about religion and politics and the coronavirus. And so we just wanted to give you a taste of what I guess like what content might feel like as part of Gotham. So that'll be great. We'll hear from him. That'll be about half an hour, and then we'll have a chance to have some Q&A with him, and then we'll end. And if people want to hang out and have more questions, you can stay on the call, but we'll end officially at 9 o'clock. We have a lot to get through, I know, so I'm going to jump in. Just want to give you a really quick overview. I know a lot of you go to Redeemer, so you're sort of somewhat familiar with Gotham maybe, or CFW, and there's those of you who don't really have that background or sort of context. So just a little bit here. So Gotham is like the flagship. Well, actually, before I do that, let's close this poll and let's see what we got. All right. Do you guys all see that now? So it looks like we have 52% of you are from Manhattan, 21% Queens, wow, 18% Brooklyn, no one from Staten Island or the Bronx. Somewhere else is 11%, significant. Okay, what church do you attend? Neighboring church, 43%, representing. Wow. We have Redeemer Downtown, 14, West Side, 14, East Side, 18, LSQ 9. It's pretty evenly represented there. 4% not currently attending church. What is your industry? Wow, arts, entertainment, design, 29%. So we have close to a third in arts, entertainment, design. That's really cool. Education, 7%. Can you guys see this? I can't hear anyone, but someone nod.
Yes, yeah, we can see it.
Cool.
It's on there.
Great. Media advertising, 14%, business entrepreneurship technology, 18%, professional services, 4%, science and healthcare, 11%, ministry, social sector, 11%, real estate, 2%, other unemployed, 5%. Wow. And we have, 6+ years with 40% of you. That's significant. It's got some true New Yorkers here. Great. Age range. Most of you are 25 to 35. Right, and 18 to 25 is 7%. Cool. This is really awesome. Female 73 to 29. Feels like an average New York Christian event. All right. That was really interesting. Thanks for sharing that, guys. Maybe in the follow-up email, we can share that with you. But it was good to get a sense of just who you guys are and where you're from and what sectors you're in. I love that we have a lot of artists here. That's really encouraging. All right, I'm going to stop sharing that. Okay, let's jump back in. really quick overview again. So CFW, we're a shared ministry of Redeemer, and our purpose really stems from, I think, a belief that there's a gap in our theology when it comes to work and its sort of larger meaning for our lives. One of the first ministries that a church will start, one of the main ministries of a church is like a kids ministry, right, or a youth ministry. And those are good, right? And we don't really have a lot of them in New York, but depending on the neighborhood. But, just about everyone at some point in their lives will work, right? And we don't often consider how to speak into that reality that for many of us consumes, most of our waking hours, particularly in a city like New York. So CFW really exists to fill that gap, right? To fix a problem. And this is a main problem that I think plagues the church today when it comes to faith and work is dualism. And this is a theme that we explore a lot in Gotham, and I'm drawing on Keller a lot here. And so he talks about this idea of dualism as separating the sort of like the spiritual and the sacred, right, off from the rest of life. And at its root is really this view of the material world as bad, right, and the spiritual world as good. And I think one of the consequences of dualism is really a belief that the only way to really serve God is by working for the church, right, or evangelizing or discipling. We see the church and everything the church does as good and untainted, while the secular world is sort of bad and corrupted, right? So when it comes to work, I think we often see it as only sort of an opportunity for evangelizing our co-workers, right? And another consequence is that it sort of seals off our personal beliefs and faith from the way we actually live and work in the world. So Christianity is seen as this means of individual spiritual peace and strength, right? Not as this comprehensive interpretation and framework and worldview of reality that affects every single thing that we do. Not just what we do on Sunday, but what we do Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, 10 to 6. So, Christians tend to look at their faith for personal salvation, right? But the rest of their lives, and particularly in a place like New York, a very secular city like New York, the rest of our lives are shaped by popular culture or the dominant narratives and worldviews that exist, that are competing for our attention and our heart. And so we end up not being able to integrate our faith and our work in any real sort of substantive way. And so CFW, through Gotham, and this is on the website, we exist to explore and investigate the sort of power of the gospel to renew our hearts, our communities, and the world, and in and through our day-to-day work. And so this is why we divide up the curriculum into 3 main sections. One is the heart, right? How does the gospel change our hearts? How does it change our perspective? And what does that mean for our work and how we see our work? How does the gospel change the way we see and treat others? This is the community section, right? Especially our co-workers, our boss, the interactions we have on a day-to-day basis in our workplace. And then finally, the work, and this is my favorite part, like how does the gospel change the way we see our industry or the culture at large? And this is all rooted in the truth that the implications of the gospel are cosmic, right? God's not just saving our souls and sending us to heaven in this embodied paradise, but he's making all things new. This is the truth of Revelation 21, right? He's renewing the whole world. And so that is the sort of framework, that's the perspective that we bring into Gotham and that we apply to the curriculum. And these are the ideas that we'll be wrestling through. There's so much more to talk about. There's so much there. I want to share really quickly a short video, and then I'm going to introduce the pastors real quick. So let's see if I can do this. All right. All right, can you guys see that? All right, can you guys see the video?
Yep.
All right, perfect.
I was not going to stay in New York, actually. I remember very clearly in the March before the Gotham class year, sort of saying, I'm done with New York, I'm done with L'Oreal, I need to get out of here.
Before entering into Gotham, I really had I would say, a very narrow idea of what faith and work really meant. I really felt like those were separate things and not necessarily integrated in any way. And when I did think about faith going into work, it was always like, I should do pro bono branding projects, or I should try to give more financially.
I knew all work was important, and I knew it was there. I just didn't have any context for why.
One of the things I've always wondered about / struggled with in New York is this duality in which we exist as professionals.
So trying to bring those two extremes into a mid-ground is, I think, what the Gotham experience has allowed me to do a little bit better.
I think I was quite worried about the time commitment and not wanting to say yes to anything and then doing it like 80%. That was my worry. So if you go in, you're all in. If you're not, you're not.
I think for me, a huge change was just from before Gotham to after was this understanding of how important prayer is and how important like actual time, and especially in a place like New York City, setting time aside for God versus just like, oh, I'll kind of pray on the train or as I walk into work.
And my self-worth is highly rooted in the performance that I have at work. And I was set free. I really have to say that the Lord has given me a lot of freedom in changing my paradigm through Gotham.
For the first time, it isn't just a story. It really is, He loves me. And why do I know that? Because He died for me. And why do I know that? Because I was so not worthy of it. And so in that sense, it's a game changer.
So now I can look at brokenness outside of me because I've dealt with the brokenness within me with a lot more compassion and with a lot more grace and mercy than I ever did.
For me, as a performing artist, what happens is I spend most of my time around theatrical individuals. Being pulled out of that and set into a space where you have business people and lawyers and financial folk and people in the medical industry, their approach to life and to their world is colored by their vocation.
I can't think of another point in my life in which I'd have this opportunity, because in so doing, you are really forming great relationships as you forge your way ahead, and you're creating for yourself, quite honestly, a strong network of people who can encourage you and that you can encourage and who can build you up and that you can sort of traverse this world together.
Because I can read these books on my own, but what I was going to get out of it would really be vastly different. So to have that kind of guidance and a community to work out those issues and thoughts with was amazing.
If I believe the gospel to be true and Christ is who He says He is, then that has to fundamentally rearrange the mental furniture up here.
And having that really called out and put into some detail and some color into it was like, okay, what we do matters.
I really thought it would require a lot longer for me to see the results or see the impact of Gotham, but it was, at least in my case, it was extremely immediate.
Looking back, I can see God's hand so much in asking me to do Gotham. It's been encouraging actually this past Christmas to sit with family members who say, wow, I can really see that Gotham actually was a pivotal point in your life and there has been so much personal change.
All right. Cool. All right. I'm going to introduce the pastors real quick. We have Mark from East Side, and we have Mila from West Side, and Jeff from Downtown. So I just want to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves, just talk a little bit about their role at Redeemer and their involvement with CFW in Gotham, and then just why they think Gotham is worth your time. So Mila, do you wanna jump in there?
Sure. Well, hi everyone. My name is Mila. I'm really happy to see quite a few familiar faces, or at least read your names. I'm glad that you guys are here. I wish we could meet in person, but this is better than nothing. So so I have been last 2 years working for Redeemer West Side. I'm overseeing their faith and work function, and I'm also on pastoral staff, so doing pastoral care primarily in addition. But yeah, a little bit about my background. I actually went to business school, and I was in international business for 12 years. I worked in global sales and marketing, primarily in Europe, but pretty much globally. I was traveling for a long time. So I was in technology, loved it, every bit of it. But there was then 9 years ago, God kind of called me to seminary. So I made a pretty major change in my life at that point, and I moved to Los Angeles and went to Fuller Seminary and studied there another career. So I have a degree in marriage and family therapy from Fuller Seminary, and I've been working since I graduated 2013. I've been working in full-time ministry, first in Los Angeles in a church, and then the last 2 years I've been here in New York City. I absolutely love this faith and work function for a lot of reasons, but it really makes sense to someone with my background to actually combine a little bit of my background from my previous corporate life and then truly integrate my faith life with it. I think back in the day, I wish I would have been able to go through a program like Gotham. That would have certainly helped me to make sense of my daily life. I've been Christian for most of my life, and Jesus has always been a very integral part of my personal life, but I struggled to make sense how I can bring it to my daily kind of work life. Obviously, as Corey mentioned that already, we tend to look at it in a way that it is our role to evangelize, which it is, but the fact that God actually created us to work and work on its own is a really good thing, is something which I find mind-blowing, that he actually created each one of us very unique with special skills and talents, but also passions, so that he can place us all over the world in a lot of different positions and places where we can be contributing to his kingdom work by being part of that work that he's doing in these specific areas all around the world. But yeah, I think why Gotham is so integral is that it really helps you to kind of learn to see God and yourself, and then the relationships that you have, and then your relationship to the wider world, and what is your position in all of these different spheres. And it certainly gives you tools, but also perspective to kind of divert your daily life. That why does it really make a difference that you are Christian in this world, in this very city, with the actual people that he has placed into your life.
Thanks, Mila. All right, let's hear from Mark.
Hey, everyone. Can you all hear me okay? Okay,
Oh, you're
great.
coming to us from your study.
Yeah, this is my home library here. All my personal collection just behind me. But thank God for Zoom virtual backgrounds. It's just covering up all the mess behind me right now. But I'm a pastor at Redeemer East Side, and most of my role has involved spiritual formation, community development, and I also oversee the faith and work initiatives as well. And a little bit of my background, I moved to New York in 2005 to work in finance. And so I worked in investment banking and private equity for a number of years. And so the question of why is my Christian faith relevant to what I do day to day, 9 to 5 or 9 to midnight, has been one that's been very meaningful and formative for me personally. And so, which is the reason why I'm excited to kind of be involved in the faith and work initiatives at Redeemer, Gotham, of course, being a big part of that. And so last year, when I went through the program, I actually, back in 2008 or 9 was the first year that Gotham started. And I was planning on being a part of that first cohort, 12 years ago. For various reasons, I couldn't do it. But I remember thinking to myself, I'm just gonna, all the readings that I was looking forward to, all the exercises, what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna kind of do it over on my own, just pace myself and figure out my own calendar for doing that. And the reality is, over the last 12 years, I read none of the books, which just kind of proved to me that I really had to go through it myself to get through the material, to process it together with the community, which is exactly what I did 2 years ago when I joined Gotham as a fellow, even though I was on staff at Redeemer. And I've been involved in teaching different classes, being involved in the Eastside cohort, things of that nature for this past year. And so excited that you're all here tonight, just kind of thinking about whether you want to be involved in Gotham going forward. And I'm happy to be a resource as you process those questions for yourselves. And so we'll provide our contact information later on. If you want to get in touch with me, just to hear my perspective, would be happy to chat. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Jeff, you want to jump in?
Gladly. Maybe my best way to talk about this is that while I was studying physical therapy at the University of Delaware as a 19-year-old is when I came to faith, and I immediately knew it was something far more than just being saved from condemnation. I knew it was going to involve the entirety of my life, and immediately the whole world became interesting to me. And one of the books that I read during that first year or so of starting to be a follower of Christ was a book called Being Human, The Nature of Spiritual Experience. And that was pretty transformative for me because it addressed this issue of dualism that Corey talked about earlier, that being a Christian was simply this: being robustly, vibrantly, genuinely, wholeheartedly human. And to live a human life vibrantly and beautifully and well is what it meant to be a follower of Christ, because as human beings, we were meant to know God's love, even though we regularly forget him. And as human beings, every hour of every day was meant to be part of our faithful living before the face of God. And therefore, that clearly meant that, among other things, that if your job entailed 40 to 80 hours a week, that those had to be about something more than simply marking time while we waited for Jesus to return, that they had to be part of our living faithfully before the face of God. And I think that the excellent thing about Gotham is, first of all, it is a plethora of new ideas. Now, new ideas don't change you in and of themselves, but ideas can absolutely change our paradigms and shift the way we think about living in the world. But it's not just ideas, it's ideas processed in the context of a community, where you get to verbalize those things and wrestle with them together and put flesh on them and think through what they mean for you personally. And so it's far more than just ideas, it's ideas processed in the context of community. But it's even more than that, it's ideas processed in the context of community with practices tied to it, thinking through together, how am I going to live this in the world, and what are the ways that I bring this before God and try to get this to get down deep into my heart so that it starts changing me and then manifesting the way I live in everyday life. I love the Gotham program. I think the fact that you're interacting with the kinds of ideas that if they are allowed to sort of germinate and then begin to grow, can cause your life to not only be more fruitful and faithful, but a lot more filled with a great deal more meaning and purpose, so that you have this sense that, oh yeah, every hour of every day, I'm striving to live this life before the face of God, and there's not a single aspect of it that is meant to go untouched. I think Gotham is therefore a coveted program to be a part of, and I certainly, as Mark said, am glad to wrestle through the implications of it and whether it's for you with any of you.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, pastors. We're going to jump into hearing from some of the alums. So we have Alan, Minnow, and Michelle, and the three of them have either done the program before or are currently in it. And I just want to give them an opportunity to share a little bit about their own experience with it. So if you guys want to unmute yourselves. So I'm going to ask a few questions, and the three of you feel like if you want to jump in for that question, you can. You don't have to answer every question, but I'll throw a few questions out there, and if you guys want to jump in and share, just really briefly. So why did you do Gotham? Like what prompted you to do it? What were you hoping for? What were you hoping to get out of it?
Okay, I can go.
Michelle.
I'm Michelle. So some of my most, I would say, spiritually mature friends had taken Gotham before, and it really piqued my curiosity as to what it was and what made them so, confident in their faith. And so I was hoping to deepen my theological understanding of God when, I joined some of these info sessions and spoke to other people who had done it in the past.
My name's Minnow. I just want to say I think it's super cool that it's mostly neighboring churches here that are in arts and design and people who've been in New York for 6+ years, because when I was at the info session, it was me and like two other people in arts and design. I'm a photographer, like two other people, mostly not neighboring churches, and everybody was like around a year and being in New York. So it's like the complete opposite in terms of demographic, which is interesting. I'm still in the Gotham cohort right now, and we're finishing up in May. But I think for me, I just wanted to understand what my role as a creative meant in sort of city and renewing culture in the city. Sort of my work doesn't sometimes feel as on the ground as a healthcare worker or as finance, or it doesn't feel as connected into the city as I think other professions do. But I wanted to understand how art and creativity can do that in a gospel lens. So that was one of the main reasons I wanted to join Gotham.
Hi, everybody. I'm Alan. I did Gotham a few years back. It was a combination of getting to know Redeemer and get more plugged in, wanting to really learn a lot more about theology. And then, like Michelle, I had a number of friends who encouraged me to do the Gotham program, and I looked up to them, and so it was kind of a no-brainer after that.
Thanks, guys. Also, for the participants, I've enabled these ways that you can interact. I don't know if you can see them in your screen. There's like a yes and a no and a thumbs up and a clap. So if you feel free to interact in those ways if you want. So for the panel, was there like a moment, sort of a game-changing moment for you in the program where something shifted for you in your perspective? Maybe it was a practice, maybe it was an idea that sort of disrupted your life or the way that you saw work, or the way that you sort of applied your own theology to the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, going to why I wanted to join Gotham, so even before Gotham starts, they sort of give a lot of summer reading to do, and I was just sort of going through the books, and one of the books that we're reading was by Andy Crouch called Culture Making, and my mind was blown even before like Gotham started. That book, it was really formative in terms of how it's carried through all the way till now, and I read that in August or something, and there's a quote that he says, "So if we seek to change culture, we will have to create something new, something that will persuade our neighbors to set aside some existing set of cultural goods for our new proposal." And growing up, I always thought of creativity or art as either we have to imitate what's already out there, do something that's different, or don't do anything like that at all. Like do something completely different. But Andy Crouch was saying you have to make more of it, just as good, things that are just as appealing and just as beautiful so that people can say, I like that better than what I have here. But it's just that my art is coming from a place of Christ and coming from a place of the gospel. Even if they don't know that from the get-go, that's where it's coming from, and it has to be appealing. And so creating more of culture in order to change it is it gives me a lot of permission to do what it is that I want to do. And I think that was one of the most, revolutionary ideas for me.
I think the thing that really stuck with me was Walter's, in his book Creation Regained, it's the structure and direction distinction, which is basically it's kind of looking at culture, including your work, from like God made everything, so that's structure. Sin broke everything, that's direction. And then that kind of goes all the way to Kuiper, where we talk about the whole world in as different spheres. Like God cares about everything, and God is reshaping everything. And here comes the new heavens and the new earth, to put all the structure and direction back in the same, realigned. And that your work is a part of that. That your work is part of your Christian calling and part of your Christian ministry. That kind of brought it all together. That was super helpful.
Yeah, and even adding to that creation is inherently good. That creation is still unfolding now, and that it's still going from garden to city, that it's still maturing. And sin is only a perversion of what is good. It's not on the same level as good and bad, that it's not this thing we need to avoid. It's just taking what's there and changing it. And our job is to highlight what is already good about creation, and not having the sacred and secular sort of divide of what life and outside of church or in church can be, but it's all sort of connected together.
It's good stuff. So thinking maybe about, like, did Gotham change something about the way you see yourself, or maybe about the way you see God, or even your community? Anything really specific stand out there? All right, maybe we'll skip that one.
No, I can answer it.
Okay, great.
We're all trying to be polite. I think in 3 ways for me, it really changed the way, like, who I was in relationship with. I don't think I'm friends with any less Christians, or I'm probably friends with a lot more Christians right now than before, but I'm also still really involved in non-Christian circles. But being really aware of our differences and similarities in our worldviews, and kind of like respecting and understanding that a little bit deeper in my relationships have changed since Gotham. And as you said, it's not a dichotomy in any way. And that happens even in Christian circles. 2, it gave me sort of like a newfound joy of just some of the menial work that I was doing that's felt, kind of unnecessary, unimportant, and really validated my own self-worth as to like my company. And I think it really allowed me to see opportunities where I could be more involved and see change that could help my company flourish. And I don't remember praying for God, like before Gotham, praying for my company, my coworkers, as much as I do now. And really, thirdly, my prayer life, both individually and communally, has changed since I've taken Gotham.
That's great. Thank you. So I want to just ask one more question of the group, and then I just want to open it up for questions from the participants in the meeting. So how would you describe Gotham to someone who doesn't know about it, who's never heard of it? How would you sort of explain it in your own words to them?
I was actually talking to a friend about this the other day, asking me about Gotham, and I said Gotham is sort of a head fake. It's sort of like they say it as one thing, but actually is something else. And we talk a lot about like faith and work, and it's not that it's not there, and we talk a lot about it, but it's actually just a really, really deep discipleship program where you get to meet with people who are sort of at this same convergence as you are, and you understand each other and on the same page about a lot of things. And as New Yorkers, work is one of the most important and time-consuming things that we have. And so faith and work is just bringing people in to think about work, but it's actually how do you surrender more of yourself to Christ. And I think at the end of it, you just come out understanding that everything falls under the lordship of Christ, but you go in thinking, I'm going to do better at my work and I'm going to learn tactics and do this and that and all that. But you just gain a lot of friends and you just feel a lot more humble about yourself. And so I don't know, that's what Gotham really is at the end of the day.
Sounds like the Gotham program is working.
Yeah, it's all a lie. No, I'm kidding.
I would say the same thing. I think I tell people it's a theology program with an emphasis on community. But I think really what's beneficial about it is it provides a really great structure for spiritual discipline and also discipleship. Yeah, like I think it's made a difference in the type of jobs that I go after and the way that I approach work internally. I'm not sure if it makes that much of an external difference, but I think people have different testimonies that come out of it, so we can't guarantee it's going to be this awesome time for everybody. But I definitely think God rewards those people who have faith and who seek Him, and Gotham has the perfect structure for that.
Yeah, I think it's hard to disagree with those. It's a 9-month, really intensive discipleship program built around theology and community. And what Minnow's talking about, the head fake is like, we do get to faith and work, but if you want to, faith and work is actually this far downstream from the kind of life-changing theology we all need to get there. So we actually do spend from about September to March doing all this other stuff. And then I think everybody kind of felt it in the January retreat. It's kind of like we do all this prep work and all this building, and then kind of like you hit the detonator and things just start opening up for the rest of the year. And so the faith and work stuff comes along, but you might be surprised at how long it takes. But also the preparation required is really helpful though. It's really good.
And I think it takes that long to ask the right question. You come in with questions you want answered, and then you realize, oh, these aren't the questions that are important or the right way of asking. You need all that time to sort of understand how to frame your questions. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would also
get a lot of new friends in the process.
Yeah, I would also add that it just provides a really good way to learn functional theology, which I don't know if like my previous church experiences have definitely necessarily led to that.
Thanks, guys. So I just want to open it up a little bit for any of the participants. Do you guys have any questions? Just feel free to unmute yourself and just throw a question at the panel. And you guys feel free to answer whoever feels like they want to answer. So jump in, please. Love to hear from you.
Should we type the questions or ask the questions?
I would say, I'd love to have as much interaction as possible. If you want to ask it, great. If you feel a little bit shy, that's okay too. We'll post it in the chat. But if you can, go for it, unmute, and then we'll get to the questions that are in the chat if there are any after that.
I have a kind of an amateur question. So how will this class be different than if I read Tim Keller's Every Good Endeavor?
Well, I would simply say that Tim Keller's Every Good Endeavor is a book of ideas. They're really helpful. If you haven't encountered them before, they, again, can shift your paradigm, but not in the way that they will if you see them in the broader context of the theology that undergirds that book. And again, understanding this notion that, yes, my spirituality is, that to to be spiritual is actually to be human, and it touches absolutely everything. And then to interact with those ideas with others. You can't substitute just reading for interacting with others around the same material in this broader context of, again, helping us to become fully devoted followers of Jesus, which just touches every aspect of our life.
We actually have one of the co-authors of that book on the call. So, Catherine, do you want to say anything to that? No pressure.
So if you was one of the co-authors, I was to mention in our small group, we went just through this book here the last month. And that's why would be interested in, I'm actually from Germany, Munich. And my question, we really like the book. So we in our church also have groups like a small business stuff meeting together, but something really to put it together, life and work. There's no really program. And we actually had the idea in our small group, what can we do for this? Is there a program? And so that's why I joined here. And my question would be, for example, do you have any partners here in Europe, in Germany or Munich, for example? Or
so can I respond to that? I'm Catherine, and we wrote the book to be like a 101 level, and the Gotham program really builds on that. That's the starting point. It gets everyone to sort of a level set, and then it builds both theologically, but it also builds by applying it in our daily life, and it builds connecting it to developing and growing our relationship with God for discernment and the spiritual side of it. So it's obviously, I would recommend this program to take it to the next step. And to just answer your second level of questions, you could do it in Munich. We have people working on it in Frankfurt, and you could join in with Redeemer City to City in Frankfurt to connect with them, and they could help you get something going in Munich.
Thanks. Yeah, Ralph, I'll email you. We have something called the Global Faith and Work Initiative, and they help similar programs get set up. So I'll connect you with those after the call. Thanks for the question. Anyone else?
Can I add one quick thing to that?
Yeah, please.
So when Tim Keller wrote Every Good Endeavor, one thing that Tim is great at doing is reading everything else that's out there and then synthesizing it in a kind of digestible way for a lot of other people. But one challenge with that is if we only read kind of secondhand literature that's out there, in some ways we don't get the kind of that raw beauty you get from reading from the primary sources. So in the game of telephone, when you tell someone a message and it gets passed down the line, inevitably what's happened is that the original message maybe gets changed or altered in some way down the line. But when you go to the original source material and you start to read that, it starts to unpack and open up new ways of thinking about God and the world and our work in ways that perhaps we didn't imagine or expect. And so that's one of the values, I think, of Gotham. We read a lot of the kind of quote unquote source material literature that's out there, kind of the greatest hits, if you will, of theology and public faith and things of that nature. And so I would just kind of throw that in the mix too.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, feel free to jump in.
I had a question. My name is Sunil, and originally I'm from India. The last 14 years I've been in the tri-state area, last 2 years in the Bay Area as well. I'm curious as to what the sphere of impact this program envisages us. I keep hearing the impact on the city, culture of the city and stuff. But I'm just wondering if we are thinking about whether this program allows someone like me who's a bicultural, almost like a global type of, I work for a predominantly Indian company with 480,000 people. And whether some of that plays out into an impact where our mission is more personally global as a result of this Gotham Fellowship, or the focus is how to impact the city.
So towards the end of I'm in the middle of it right now as I'm finishing up Gotham, but we do a cultural renewal project where we sort of have our own paper and project on like applying all the things we learn into something that we're interested in. And I think in that you're able to see it as small and like near to like a coworker or somebody, or it can be as big as you want it to be. And so in those projects that we do, there's so many varying, there's different things that some people are just doing something on like a intellectually interesting level and doing a renewal project. I'm doing something that's very specific to my work and what it is I'm doing. And so in that way, I think it just, everyone has their own way of interpreting it, and you're able to sort of fully express it towards the end in that project. And so I would encourage you to lean into exactly what it is that you're thinking and what's around you, and see how it applies there. I don't think there's a rubric on what that looks like.
Yeah, I would say that the theology you learn and the community you get around you help you to answer those questions by the end of the program, definitely, like Minna was saying. And the theology is very scalable. So like if you're just working on an arts project as your final project, or a friend of mine has his own contracting company in the city, and his project was redoing the whole management structure for his company and the communications and how he got the team leads and contractors to like be equipped and work together. So it can just be wherever God's put you, everyone gets the same theology, but wherever God's put you, it's going to play out different ways.
Okay, so this is more of a practical question, but I'm really excited about this and want to do it, but realistically, I'm trying to think about the time commitment in terms of my life and my job. And so I'm just curious, like, what is roughly the average time commitment for you guys, especially in regards to like the stuff you do outside of sessions? Like, I know the sessions and that kind of thing. And how did you find yourself managing that?
Do you say you read books often during the week? Like just for fun?
I mean, yes, but my job is a lot of hours. So I normally read about 50 books during the summer because I'm a teacher, and none during the year. So
I think that was the most challenging for some people, just because they don't really read, and that there's a lot of volume of stuff to read. I think it is a fire hose of information, and it's not meant for us to understand it, every week. But I think that was the most challenging part. And then it's just the weekly time commitments and stuff. But you sort of start enjoying it, and you work your life around doing it because it's really fun to be with those people. But the reading, I think, is the most challenging part.
Yeah, I would highly encourage like committing to this as your primary source of engagement. And like that meant for me to step down as a CG leader and not be as active in youth ministry and all of these other things that I was involved in. The reading usually ranges from a few chapters to a whole book. Usually a small book, not a big book. I'm not a reader, to be fully honest with you. So I'm probably the worst case scenario for a Gotham participant, but I would say it could range from like doing the reading for an hour to, if you really want to like sit with it, and some of them could be pretty dense, it could be a couple hours a week. I think the most challenging part was doing the daily devotions, just for me, because prior to that, I don't think I had as rigid of a structure built in for prayer and just spending time with God. And so that consistency, I think, was just hard to maintain after a while. But I think definitely, you know, having your peers for accountability and for my own self, just really building that discipline was helpful throughout the program.
I don't, Michelle and Minnow, to me, it felt like it was the commitment of like one undergrad level class or something. Is that how it felt for y'all in terms of reading and engagement?
I think you're also exceedingly smart, Alan. I think it's a lot easier for you than
Me, it was more like a grad school class.
One grad school level class, but just one. if you wanna like think about it in those terms.
Thanks, guys. I just want to open it up now to just a broader open Q&A for the next 10 minutes. So if you have any general questions about the program or about the requirements or application, anything like that, just feel free to just throw them out. Me or one of the pastors will get to it. But yeah, any questions you have in general about the program, this is your opportunity to ask them. And again, if we don't get to them, if they're in the chat, or please email us afterward. We want to answer all your questions. So, but yeah, open up for any questions you guys have.
I saw a question about financial aid. That's just you fill out a form as part of your application. It gets reviewed and they communicate back to you. I saw a question about how could Gotham be particularly important for us in this cultural moment? And maybe that's just out there.
Yeah, so we do have financial aid available. So if you find yourself unable to pay the tuition fee, we do have options there for you. So I don't want that to be something that changes your desire to apply. So if you can't do it financially, we want to work with you to figure out a solution. So
I have a quick question for the alumni and the fellowship. What are a couple areas where you think there's room for improvement in the fellowship?
I can throw something quick in there, but what we've tried to do over the past couple years is try to read a broader range of authors and read from a wider range of perspectives, whether that's from the global church. A lot of authors that we tend to read kind of in reform circles tend to be dead white males, and we will read them, but we will also read a lot of other perspectives as well, and that's become increasingly so over the past couple of years. Yeah.
Awesome.
I think for me, I did Gotham last year. And one of the things I really wanted out of the program more, this is coming from the person who didn't read, not during Gotham, prior to Gotham, I read during Gotham, is just more discussion time. There, some of the reading was, I just had so many questions, so many discussions, and you have all these active minds who have the same level of curiosity and commitment and passion for the content, whether they agree with it or not. And so I really wanted a little bit more discussion time. That being said, we're all very busy and fully working and stuff. So I understand why the program is structured in the way that it does, and it does allow for some discussion as well as learning. But some of the things we wanted to do on the side was like meet separately and talk about that. And there is room for the community gets like the Gotham class gets really close, I would say, or at least communicates frequently. And so, there is room for you to create that space for each other.
So I'm seeing a question here about how will Gotham change due to COVID-19. That's a great question. So we're operating on the assumption that by the fall things will be back to relative normal. I mean, who knows what normal will look like, but we're assuming that we'll be able to meet in groups. And so as far as we're concerned, Gotham is going forward. If for some reason we can't meet together in larger groups, we might have to do a couple classes at the beginning virtually, but as soon as we can, we'd be going back to in person. And worst case scenario is that we can only meet in smaller groups, so we would start with smaller groups, but we're hoping and expecting that things will be back to normal and Gotham will look as normal as it does right before COVID. But just to sort of assure you that Gotham is moving forward. If we have to make some slight adjustments in the beginning, if things are still bad, we will do that. But our hope and expectation is that things will be relatively normal by the time fall comes around. So yeah, we're moving on with that assumption, and we'll make adjustments, even if we have to meet in smaller groups at the beginning, and maybe webcast some of the teachings, but we'll make it work. But yeah. We get another question here from application process, highly competitive. It's a coveted program. We can't take everyone that applies. We look at every application really carefully. We get a lot of people from certain industries and that we can't admit because we want to create a really diverse class. We want people from different backgrounds. We want people from different industries. We want to make the class very diverse. So sometimes we have too many in one area, or so. We can't accept everyone, but we encourage you to apply, and if you're the right fit, then we'll definitely give you an opportunity to join. Does any of the pastors want to contribute to those questions at all?
I would just say that even if you were not selected this year, you might be selected next year. Like there are people who might, for whatever reason, not be part of one class, and they would be then the following class. So that should not be a place of discouragement. And we would always kind of discuss individually with every person if that would be the case.
Got another question about the retreats. So the retreats, we have two main retreats. We have the fall retreat, and then we have the winter retreat, and then the final exercise we do is an in New York City retreat where we'll do a commissioning. But the retreats are really a weekend away. We go to Princeton, and it goes from Friday night to Sunday afternoon. And the weekend is really an opportunity for us to solidify the community element. We take part in spiritual formation practices. We have different sessions, and they all revolve around a theme. And so everyone is there. You're required to be at all of them, and they're really wonderful weekends away. They were the highlights for sure for me. I was a Gotham Fellow in 2016. So did anyone else want to add to that about the retreats?
I could just say that, like, honestly, it's, I don't think I've ever seen anything like what happens during the first retreat. Like, there is a group of people that God has put together who don't know each other. They all sisters and brothers, but they have not most of them have not ever met one another. And you come Friday night together, but you come together, you committed to be in this journey for 9 months together. And when you leave on Sunday, there is an amazing kind of a miracle that happens during that time. That is really God at work, who really lines people's lives for this journey together. And you really experience the type of closeness that you have with one another only because you are united by the Spirit of God. And that's just really powerful experience. And you make a covenant to be there for one another in a way that we don't oftentimes nowadays anymore as New Yorkers commit to almost anything. But it is really beautiful to see that there is a start of a journey where we all are willing to invest in ourselves and the people that God has placed into our lives. So it's a very powerful experience.
I saw a question in the chat I can answer real quick. What would you say to someone who is not super established in their career but interested in Gotham? That was kind of me a few years ago. And Gotham is a great program for just starting out, as long as you kind of, you're a working person, you kind of understand, as what you're up to. But it's really good for starting out because it puts you on a good foundation, I think, for the rest of what you want to do. And it's really good even if you're, in the middle of a career, because it can be a great checkup too.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think Gotham is great for any sort of stage that you're in career-wise. If you're starting out, builds a solid foundation. If you're in a transition, it gives you the sort of frameworks to think about what that might mean. If you're later on in your career, you're well established, you're sort of considering what's next or where you go from there. Like it's great for any stage.
Corey, and I'll just add that I think in this cultural moment of huge disruption, it's really valuable now because all of our societies disrupted. And so to have a way of thinking about God's purposes, both on the destruction side, but particularly on the renewal and resurrection side, is so helpful. So I think next year's class could be off the charts because there's so much new visioning to work with.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. I think that I would totally agree that Gotham is just as important now than ever, for us to think theologically about our own work and the changing nature of work and how we can be agents of renewal in our culture, particularly right now. Thanks, Catherine. Any last final questions before we jump over to hear from Dr. Baker? And again, if you didn't get a chance to ask your question, please email, pop it in the chat, and we'll get to it. But
I have a quick question. This is mostly regarding like personality. I have in general, I'm more of a writer and a reader, and I was wondering, do the Gotham classes help like someone like me who to articulate more about faith and work? I don't know if that makes sense, more just like a quieter disposition. Like I want to, but I have a hard time like in that moment. And when I think of Gotham classes, I think of very like rapid discussions and bouncing ideas off each other. I was wondering if someone could talk about maybe what they've seen or experienced.
I'll speak to that really quickly. I do think you'll get a great chance to take those ideas and start to articulate them so that you feel comfortable with their articulation, and then you therefore will start to feel comfortable articulating it to others. We do try to give the groups chances for everyone to be speaking, because I don't think you can assimilate the information without trying to both reflect about it and give verbal sort of form to your thinking. And I don't think any of us comes out with any clear thinking unless we start to verbalize it. And so I do think the important part of the community aspect of it as a whole. So I think, yeah, regardless of whether you're an extrovert or an introvert, you'll be given the opportunity to give voice to the ideas so that you can start to feel comfortable saying, oh yeah, that does resonate with me. And you'll find, as all of us do with new ideas, that we start coming to the conviction that, wow, I believe a lot more than I ever knew I believed, but we never know that until we start to verbalize it.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff.
I also want to say quickly, Corey, that you all should feel free to reach out to any of us, particularly the pastoral team. We love working with cohorts. I certainly have a great deal of joy of working with the downtown Gotham folk. And if you are in one of the congregations and you have further questions you'd like to talk to any of us individually, by all means, reach out to us. We'd love to talk with you.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, and please, like, email me, Corey@redeemer.com. Reach out to the pastors if you go to one of the Redeemer congregations, and we're here to answer any of the questions you guys have. We're going to hand over to Dr. Baycoat. He's going to give you a little bit of a taste of what a Gotham class might look like. So I will hand over to him, and I think he's here. If you want to say hi, Vince, and he can introduce himself, and I'll hand over. And then we'll have some time at the end to do a little bit of a Q&A with Vince. So.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay? Yes, okay. All right. Now for a test. Can you see this? Can you see that? Okay.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, all right. I'm not going to say a lot about that, but it does set the stage for what I want to talk about, right? I mean, you've heard a lot about this, I'm sure, right? And like every 15 seconds, we're hearing something about it, and we're hearing hot takes about it, etc. But there's something I want to observe about this in relationship to the types of things that we talk about in Gotham. And that is, this is called a crisis. I know, isn't that obvious? But here's the thing I want us to think about is when there's a crisis, Christians generally don't ask whether they should be involved in engaging the public, right? Because everybody's thinking about survival. A crisis has emerged, and then people are just trying to figure out some way to either make sense of it, or they're trying to figure out some kind of action to pursue to at least survive, if not try to move things towards a better kind of world. But I think it's interesting to ask what happens when it's not a pandemic and when you're not in a crisis, and then there's questions about the world that we live in, right? What about then? What should a Christian do in a time like that? And depending upon your background and depending upon your what really the various people or various traditions that have informed your Christian formation, you may have hesitation about engagement with the public, or at least not know why Christians ought to do it, or what are the biblical or theological reasons for it. Or you may even have experienced something like what I did when it was in my college years, where I felt like it was proper for Christians to be involved in things like politics and the arts, and to have strong theological reasons for their engagement in all kinds of executive levels of the workforce and that type of stuff. I had an intuition about that, but I could not make a case for that. And I think one of the things for us to think about in a moment like this is, what is it that Christians believe that would orient them towards saying, of course, we ought to be engaged in the public, whether it's a crisis or whether it's a business as usual, whether it's quite mundane, actually. What would motivate us to do that? So what I want to do is, first, I want to talk about the ways that certain Christian beliefs can orient us towards doing that. The backdrop of saying that is this. Every Christian believes many things. There are many Christian doctrines. And I think one of the things to think about is, what's the relationship between the things that Christians believe and their reasons for participating in the public or for not participating in the public, if that's the approach that they're going to take. One of the things that can happen in a crisis like a pandemic is that you've got a crisis, and then people know they ought to do something, and then they kind of scramble around and look for ways that something that they believe as Christians hooks onto that crisis and then gives a reason for looking at it a particular way, interpreting it a particular way, and then proposing a certain kind of response to the crisis. And I understand that sometimes that's just the way it works out. There's a situation, and then we ask, how does what we believe connect to it? But I think we need to think about another way, which is, how's what we believe already create an orientation, a disposition, a trajectory towards engagement with our life in the world? So there are a lot of things that Christians believe about God, his world, about what's wrong with the world, about how God's addressing the great problems of the world, about salvation, etc. I'm not going to, in 30 minutes, talk about everything in systematic theology and how it connects to this, but I am going to choose two, and to make it easy, I'm going to talk about the beginning and the end. Or, in more typical parlance, I'm going to talk about creation. That's the first doctrine. And then eschatology is the second. Creation, how it all begins. Eschatology, how it all wraps up. And here's the thing. There are ways you can look at both of these that where you can say, actually, the way I think about this gives me every kind of reason not to be engaged. Or the case I want to make is, there are reasons why these beliefs actually give you reason to be engaged. So here's one of the ways of thinking about it. Let's say that the big question we're asking is, do Christians have permission to participate in the public? That's the big question. Let's say that's the big question, right? So I'm just going to put above all these just the word permission. Okay. And then what happens with these doctrines? How does that either take us into the world that God has made, or what are ways that people look at these things and actually say there's reasons for us to stay out? So, starting with creation. I tried to come up with like some alliteration for things tonight. I don't always use alliteration, so I don't want to create false expectations, but I did have that for tonight. So with creation, let's think about this. There are two options here. One option is the reason for staying out. The other option is the reason for going in and engaging. So the question with creation then, does creation lead us to a kind of cautionary stance? Do we think caution first? I don't want to just put, cease and desist or something like that. I want to say caution for this reason. The reason some Christians would say, I don't think Christians really should be investing too much in the work world, in the art world, in the world of finance, in politics, is because we ought to be cautious because of what happened in Genesis 3. And so their view would be that because of Genesis 3, things have gone wrong in the creation. And because they've gone wrong in the creation, and they're still going wrong, even though salvation has happened, salvation does not lead us to then now say, okay, now that we're saved, we can go ahead and really dive into these domains of life. They would say, no, because of the reality of fallenness, we should always say, only participate if you have to, or if you are there, and if you wind up because of your gifts and abilities in a place of responsibility, the only way you bring in your Christianity into that is by looking for a way to evangelize in that circumstance. So get folks saved, but otherwise don't invest yourself too much in it because it's too worldly and it's fallen. So stay away. Caution. So it's really like a flashing caution. It's like a yellow that's like a hair's breadth from going to red. Okay, that's what I'm talking about here when I'm talking about caution. But another way of thinking about it, and the way that I think about it, is there's a caution. What if I say that the doctrine of creation is actually a catalyst for engagement in the created order? And, well, where would I get that idea from? Well, page 1 of the Bible actually is where I'd get it from. So page 1, Genesis 1:26, what happens is God's created everything else, and then it's time to create humans. And what God says in creating humans is that, what are humans for? What's their purpose? right? Let us make humans in our image and let them rule. Let them have the dominion over the creation. Genesis 1:27, he creates them, male and female. Genesis 1:28, now he says to them, get to it. Go, have dominion over my creation, fill the earth and subdue it, etc. So some of us call that the creation mandate. Some of us call that the cultural mandate. I also call it, not only me, but I and some others, we also call it the first Great Commission, because to rule over God's creation is a pretty big job. But that first Great Commission, I also think of as the either undiscovered Great Commission, because people don't talk about Genesis 1:26 and 28 that way, or the forgotten Great Commission. So if they heard something about it, then there was like amnesia about it or something. And it's true that a person who's of the caution disposition might say to me, it's great that you're on page 1, but what about page 3 or chapter 3? To which I say this, it's true that the fall happens. And so the question is, what does the fall do with this catalyst? What does it do with this great commission for having the dominion over God's world? And let me just say, when I say dominion over God's world, I don't just mean agriculture. It's everything that has to do with ordering life in God's world, with managing life in God's world. And that includes all the things that we do, especially a lot of those things that we do once we've heard the benediction and go out the doors of the church. So what about those things now that Genesis 3 has happened? So here's, I think, something that's really important and that I think people get wrong. A lot of people suggest, I think, if not make even a stronger argument, that as a result of what happens in the fall, you get actually a sense of futility about participation in the world. But if you read what's actually happening in the curse and what happens with the fall, that's not what happens. Because when God talks to Eve, he doesn't say, sorry, no more children. No, he says, now, children and complications is what he says. When he talks to Adam, he doesn't say, hey, Adam, everything that you do in terms of your relationship to the earth, your relationship to the ground, is going to be absolutely fruitless. That's not what he says. He says it's going to get complicated. You're going to get fruitfulness, but not only fruitfulness. So what it means is that a more complicated state of affairs has ensued, but it doesn't mean that what God said on page 1, that God said, hey, remember all that stuff about engaging the world, stewarding my creation, forget it. No, it's now become more complicated, but it's never vetoed. And the way that a lot of people, I think, wind up having the sort of caution approach is that, well, all that stuff that God said in Genesis 1, Genesis 3 is a big fat veto over that, a circle and slash over all of that. And I think that's a misreading of that. So creation, I would argue, is actually a catalyst for us to participate in God's world and participating in God's world in a world that is now complicated, but a world that God has not abandoned. One of the ways of talking about the fact that God hasn't abandoned it is by something called common grace. Now, usually, when people think about the word grace, they think about special grace, God's unmerited favor related to salvation. That's certainly the way the Bible talks about grace. But we also see God's unmerited favor in another way. And I've already really talked about it. When God is announcing the curse, and he tells them that there's going to be complication in childbirth, complication in their engagement with the ground, he still allows fruitfulness to occur. He is under no obligation to do that. None at all. And if you go past Genesis 3, go to Genesis 9, after the flood, God is under no obligation to say, I'm not going to do this again, but and my rainbow is an indication to you of my commitment to preserving my creation so you can participate in it. So God shows his generosity towards the entire created order, whether people are related to him rightly or not. So common grace then is common because it's to the entire world. It's grace because it's not merited. God doesn't have to do it, but he chooses to do it. So because God preserves his world, what that means is there's still the opportunity to take advantage of the catalyst we have from the doctrine of creation. So that's one way of thinking about why engaging the world out of the doctrine of creation. What about eschatology? So two options there. Option number one, and this may be the one that you probably could have guessed, escape, right? So escape is obviously get out, check out, right? In other words, what's going to happen? God's going to blow it all up. You know, like in Star Wars, like if you're into Star Wars, like episodes 4 and 6, right? Boom, exploding the Death Star, all that type of thing, right? Death Star eschatology, I like to call it. I mean, if that's what you think God is going to do at the end, then why would you waste your time putting anything into the world if it's all going to blow up, right? So what eschatology tells us to do then? Don't waste your time. Prepare for your escape. Prepare to check out, right? So from some people, eschatology means God's going to blow it all up. He's going to give us a new one. So just invest yourself in the things that will last. Oh, what are those things that are going to last? I know what those things are. Those things are just, again, introducing people to Jesus and getting them saved. And so whatever you do, if you're participating in the various domains of life external to the context of worship and what we would call traditional ministry, then there you were just trying to introduce people to Jesus so that they come into a relationship with him, and that's it. So eschatology as escape would lead some people that way. So for some people, a view with a pre-tribulation rapture certainly leads them to that. Although I want to say, this is important, it's plausible that a person could hold that view of eschatology, and I do not, okay, let me just put that out there, but I do not, but a person could hold that view of eschatology and not necessarily think escape. It's true, it tends to make people disengaged from investing much in society, but it's not a necessary implication of that view. All right, so it could be about escape from eschatology, or a word I've used many times already, eschatology could lead to actual engagement. All right, so how can eschatology lead to engagement? Well, here's one way to think about it, and I'll say it based on a text that some people often use to say, this is definitely why you got to be thinking about escaping and Death Star eschatology, etc. And that's in 2 Peter chapter 3. So 2 Peter chapter 3, from about verses 9 through 16, there is language that talks about everything being burned up. And some interpret that language to mean that God's going to, he's going to make it all blow, and then he's going to make a new one. Here's why I don't think that that's the right way to read that. Because if you read the verses before that, when it talks about the destruction of the earth, it makes reference to the flood. Now, nobody teaches about the flood and says, so what God did in the flood was literally wash away the entire globe is what he did, right? So the globe got washed away, there was nothing, and then God made a new globe after washing it all away. That's not what happened. Nobody talks about it that way. They say there's a lot of rain, there's a big flood, people drowned, then the water went down, and then, they pressed the reset button. That's generally the way that people think about it. And my point is that in that text, it used the word destruction to talk about that. And then it says it was destruction by water at first, and now it's going to be destruction by fire. And my point then is something's going to happen, but that something is not the obliteration of the created order. really what it is, it's a way of talking about the fact that judgment is going to come, and nobody, and if you don't belong to God, there's not going to be any escape. Everything's going to be laid bare. It's all going to be laid out. It's all going to be clear. And here's the thing that's important about why I'm using this text. After talking about this, the audience of 2 Peter is told basically to continue participating in their witness in God's world. Not pause, look up, don't waste your time trying to have a witness that participates in this world. That's not what that text is about. And there's another text actually that's not in 2 Peter, but I think it helps us also to think about this. And that's this interesting text in the book of Romans, verses 19 to 22. We have this language about the creation groaning for its redemption. Now, if it's groaning for its redemption, that seems to indicate that what's going to be happening with the creation is not its obliteration, okay? But there's something transformative that God is going to do at the end. And my point about all this is, if God is actually going to be restoring, transforming, renewing his creation, that suggests that there's some relationship between the things that we are doing now and putting it into the world and what's going to be on the other side. Some things will be judged and go away. Some things are going to be things that remain. So my point is that eschatology actually can continue to confirm or affirm our engagement and participation in God's world, because what eschatology is really telling us is not that God has given up on his creation, therefore escape it, but that God remains committed to his creation, therefore engage it. God does not want his people to be the ones who say, forget it. Let somebody else do it. Let's just wait for our ride to come. And then we will know that we had the right priorities because we stayed out of politics. We stayed out of taking business in leadership in business and finance and the arts and medicine and law. We can just keep going. Okay, I think that's a mistake. The creation and eschatology actually both orient us toward participation in God's work. So I think it's important to be thinking now about how is it that there are things that Christians believe that turn us toward God's world. And this is important. To be turned toward God's world does not mean that you are so turned toward it that you don't think about your own internal personal transformation. It doesn't mean that you're so turned toward it that you worship the world that God has made. No, you worship God, and what emerges out of your worship to God and your response to God is your service to him in the ways that you participate in stewarding life in his world in the various domains of life. That's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. And both creation and eschatology, the beginning and the end, orient. You got to completely agree with me about everything they think. And if you don't agree with those Christians about everything, they're going to mistreat you. And I think maybe there's some Christians that give people reason for that, all right? But one, that's not what most do. And now I'm going to show you one way to really think about doing it pretty well. So I'm going to erase this. And briefly say a few words about something called principal pluralism, and then we can talk a little bit. Let's put it up here. Principled pluralism, that is supposed to be an M there. There we go. So principled pluralism is a way of talking about the fact that we are in a pluralistic society. Okay, we are not in, a world where it's all one worldview. We are in a world of multiple worldviews. We are in a public where there are lots of people with lots of different backgrounds, lots of ways that they look at the world and make sense of the world, and lots of ways that orient them towards thinking about what's right, what's true, what's good, what are the top priorities. Principled pluralism is a way of talking about how some Christians would say, participate in the public, and it's proper for Christians to participate in the public, but when you're in the public, you're also respecting the right of other people to also inhabit that public space as well. Hence, principled pluralism, right? Because on the one hand, your principles lead you to participate in the public, like I was just saying, creation and eschatology being reasons why you might want to participate in politics, let's say. But now that you're participating in politics, okay, now what's your goal? So if you're involved in politics, if you're running for office and you win, now is your goal to only work with people who agree with you? Is your goal to only write policies that are going to benefit you? Is your goal to try to set the stage for only people who believe what you believe to actually hold office? Okay, is that the goal? That's not what principled pluralism is about. Principled pluralism is the recognition that you live in a world with all kinds of people, and that in the public space you acknowledge or honor that, and you honor their coming to the public space and making their case for how we ought to deal with things like a pandemic, for example. But you also don't have amnesia about being a Christian when it comes to how you're discerning what you will propose for how we ought to go about this. So you don't forget that you're a Christian, but you're discerning how being a Christian will refract into the ways that you go about engaging politics. I think that's very important because a lot of times people think that there are false alternatives. And there's alternative number one is Christians can just be absent from the public or kind of abdicate any engagement, right? Just stay out. And some Christians think it's best for us to stay out because you'll get too caught up in everything and then everything will go bad. To which I say, if abdication is your strategy, then being mute and not complaining should also be your strategy, because you let everybody else run society and said, I'll just deal with whatever they deal with. So abdication, I think, is also saying I'm setting aside my voice. Some people think another strategy is being triumphalistic or totalitarian, or when people use the word of theocracy, they think it means Christians take over everything. And what I want to say is, well, first of all, in the United States, the latter, Christians taking over everything, is not going to happen. One reason alone that that's not going to happen is most of the Christians who are thinking about being politically engaged, it's not like they're all interested in sharing power with each other. That's the first thing. The second thing is they don't all arrive at their reasons for being publicly engaged from the same basis, and they don't have the same priorities. So those reasons alone are reasons why you would never get this. But it's a great scare tactic if you want to make people think that Christians are the most monstrous people when it comes to politics. If they get elected, then what's going to happen? Well, the marauders are coming over the hill and they're going to torch everybody who's not like that. Okay, there's not enough organization for that to happen, first of all. But second of all, most Christians would never think that. I think a wise approach can be this principled pluralist approach, where you recognize it's proper for us to be in the game of public life, but we also recognize the game of public life is not a public that only has us as its occupants. So we're thinking about how to live well, how to respect all the people who are there, and then trying to be as winsome as we can about how we make contributions in the various domains. So I think principled pluralism is one way of participating in the public that could be, let's just put it this way, if that was the reputation of Christians when it came to public engagement, I wonder if some people would be a little less nervous when Samaritan's Purse or somebody else shows up, or somebody who's not Samaritan's Purse without a spokesperson like Franklin Graham shows up. If they wouldn't be automatically suspicious. They might say, oh, I'm glad the Christians have shown up, because there's one thing I know about them. They know who they are, but they also respect everybody else. That would be pretty amazing. So I'm going to stop with that because it's 7:45 and I've gone for at least 30 minutes, and 30 minutes is my, around 30 minutes was my, time limit. So I want to give you a chance to ask me questions. So I don't know if Corey's managing the questions or how it's happening, but whoever wants to ask a question, I'll take your question and then we'll see where it goes.
Thanks, Vince. That was so great. Yeah, as you said, I'd love for you guys to just throw out questions. Yeah, go for it.
Hello, Dr. Vince.
Hi.
Thank you so much. My question is, so when it comes to our level of cultural or political engagement as Christians, to look at it as how we look at denominations, like is that level, does that depend on how we interpret scripture or our own conscience? Because, Christians run the gamut of, when it comes to political opinions, cultural opinions. I mean, you can have the political, conservative, powerful, conservative cadres, and then you have, Christians who are a subculture in themselves who believe in just, they want nothing to do with the public sphere.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
is it down to how you interpret scripture or your conscience?
Mm-hmm. Well, as I said at the beginning, everybody's got a tradition. So, and those traditions emphasize different things or magnify certain things for various reasons in terms of their history. But people don't always know what that history was. So you go to a church that comes from a particular tradition, and they talk a certain way, and they talk about certain things more than others. And they may not tell you why in the history of their denomination, why that's what they talk about more than other things, right? But sometimes the reasons why some denominations emphasize certain things and others emphasize something else is because in their history, there were certain things that emerged that led to more attention being on a specific issue. So that can lead to certain priorities in terms of the beliefs that are given more of a megaphone or magnification. And out of that then can also become a way of talking about what the priorities ought to be for a way that Christians live their life in this world. But I think another sort of hidden thing that happens with why Christians have some of the differences in their political engagement is because they don't always ask, what gives me my political commitments? A lot of times they have their political commitments already, and then there's some way they're trying to relate their Christian faith to it. Or there's some figure that tells them how to relate their Christian faith to it. So I think that's part of what happens. So yes, it is about interpretation of Scripture. It's also about not just the interpretation of Scripture, but what Scriptures you mainly talk about. Because then there's Scriptures that people don't talk about. Because some people never talk about eschatology. Some people talk about it all the time. Some people talk about holiness and separation all the time. Other people never talk about that. And some people will talk more about engagement in a way that may sound more progressive in certain ways. And others will talk about engagement in ways that sounds more conservative. My My big picture statement would be this. When it comes to people we would generally call Bible-believing Christians, people that are at least theologically conservative, irrespective of their cultural and political commitments, I think most of them do not have a well-formed way of thinking about how their faith orients them towards public engagement. I think what gives them their priorities for public engagement are other things. Or if you will, it's the discipleship that they get from the culture and from other things rather than their discipleship as Christians. So I think, so part of, I think, you know, the aim of something like Gotham is for people to have a more clear understanding of how what you believe as a Christian is orienting you towards why you are participating in public life. So if a person's in finance, for example, I sometimes want to say, you know, sometimes people will say, this is the way that business has always been done. Right. Well, people are not doing business in 2020 the way they were doing it in 1980. Somebody innovated about something and somebody changed something. It was somebody's idea. And I always wonder, what would encourage Christians to be the people who are the innovators in that? Why is it always somebody else that needs to be the innovator? Well, a lot of times people's church background tells them stay away or make a lot of money, write checks to us, but don't talk about what you do. And maybe you feel a little guilty about it, except when you write a check about it, okay? Rather than understand that you know, there are ways that some people can be actually very responsible and do well in those types of domains. So the point I'm making is, it's not always clear in people's Christian formation how the things that they believe tell them to do anything once they get outside the four doors of the church, besides tell people about Jesus in some way. Basically be nice, and because depending on what trajectory you're in with our church, wherever that church is, then please just vote like we vote. But it's not being clear how that whole apparatus is emerging out of a larger set of Christian commitments. So I wish that it was that the public commitments emerged more explicitly out of certain approaches to doctrine. But once you get beyond the leadership, honestly, that is not very clear at all. The discipleship of the culture has a lot to do with it. But people don't know that necessarily. They may think, no, I prioritize X because I'm a Christian, to which I want to say, are you sure about that? Because I want to know, what is it about being a Christian that orients you towards those things? What is it that you believe that says this is why certain things are priorities and certain things are not? And it's just not always clear. So it's a very long answer to your question, but sure. I see a written question from Elizabeth. Where does one start balancing or integrated principle pluralism and public faith? I would say in your current domain is what I would say. So it depends upon, you know, what kind of work context that you're in. In terms of actual politics itself, at the very least, I would say begin to pay more attention to what's happening with your local politics and to see how people are participating in that. Now, please understand, the fact of proposing something like principle pluralism doesn't mean that if that's the approach that you show up with, that automatically everybody's going to be very excited because you showed up with it. You know, you have to think about politics as a very long, slow game. There are things that take place in the political realm that sometimes happen quickly, but that's very exceptional. I will say that the moment that we're in this pandemic, with so many people in a state of disruption and uncertainty, it is a golden opportunity for Christians to say, I'm here, I want to help. When they ask why you want to help, because, you know, my faith tells me to love your neighbor as yourself, and I'm trying to discern the best ways to love my neighbor as myself through what we are doing in this particular domain, political or otherwise. And I think if that was part of what people saw the Christians were starting with, some people might be less hesitant about Christians showing up in those places. But if they think Christians are there to just tell everybody you're a bad person if you don't agree with me, then that's going to be a problem. So that's a sort of answer to it. One thing I would also say, by the way, I am a fellow for an organization called the Center for Public Justice, and they have these things called political discipleship groups, and they invite people to start those. And so I'd say look into that. That's a way to, in your faith community, to get together with a certain group of people. If you can get, say, 8 to 10 people together, and then you walk through certain things together for about 12 weeks, I think it is. Those have gone really well from what I understand. So that's another way I would say to do that. I think I hear somebody's mic off.
Yeah, hi. My name is Hayden, and I just had a quick question. I was
Are you
wondering if
from
you could
Maryland?
talk about.
I see 301.
Yeah, I am.
I grew up in Maryland.
Yeah, I am.
I saw that. I was like, okay, hey, the DMV, So not that
Yeah,
what they
exactly.
call
I
the
grew up
drive-thru,
right outside of. Yeah, I grew up right outside of DC in Maryland.
Oh, so did I. Okay. Okay, cool.
Yeah. Thank you for your time. I guess one of the questions I had was, can you talk a little bit about, I guess, like, what the Bible says about just like boundaries and about sharing, I guess, faith in the workplace and things of that sort. Like, yeah, I think that would be really helpful.
What I would say is that I don't think the Bible gives people a direct command about how to navigate boundaries in the workplace. What I would say is this, is that your context will play a role in how much opportunity you have to be explicit or direct in your engagement with other people about your faith, especially, during work hours. Some contexts, people are like, as long as you get your work done, you can be whoever you are. Other people, they're more nervous about that because of what they think being a Christian is. So I would say is discern your space, and then in the discernment of your space, think about ways that you can make it obvious to people that you care about them, that the basis that you're caring about them or seeking their good is because that emerges out of, love of God and neighbor. But I think, you may be in a kind of work environment where people don't want anybody talking about that. They want people just talking about work. In which case, I would say then use in your general disposition, in the way that you talk to everybody, in the way that you're respectful to people, in the way that you seek the good for other people. Those are ways that you also speak from the faith in that environment, because your reason for doing that is emerging from your faith. So I think that's another thing to think about. So it depends upon the setting, because everybody's setting is not going to allow that. I don't think there's a virtue in saying, and so because I kept sharing the gospel every day with everybody I ran across, they fired me. So you become a martyr because of your approach to evangelism. And I guess or at least a martyr on that job. And what I would say is, I don't know that you necessarily need to take that approach to being a martyr on your job. I think, if you look at the book of Acts, you'll see that Paul was a strategic person. Right? So he discerned where he was, and in thinking about where he was, then that set the stage for him to, proclaim the faith. I think sometimes people think the language about persecution is because you went and pursued the faith in a way that guaranteed you would get persecuted, which I want to say, if you live the faith faithfully enough, long enough, in enough variety of spaces, you'll see places where people are non-Christian but are happy to hear what you have to say. And you'll run to non-Christians who will say, no, thank you. and some who say no thank you in a more hostile kind of way. So I think you have to be discerning and strategic.
Thanks, Vince. We're almost at 9 o'clock here, so I just want to first of all thank you, Vince, for just taking the time and give
You're
us
welcome.
a taste of what Gotham looks like on a weekly basis. Yeah, this has been really helpful. I hope it's been insightful for you all and given you a little bit of a taste of what Gotham would be like. We're going to close now officially. I'm gonna hang out for a little bit, so if anyone wants to hang out and if you have any final questions you'd like to ask, I'll hang out for a little bit, but we'll officially close. And again, if you have any more questions, email us, gotham@redeemer.com, or you can email me, Corey, CORY @redeemer.com, and we'd love to answer any of your questions. And we'll also post this video as well, just so other people can access it. If you know someone that wasn't able to be here tonight, you can share that as well. So let's just pray to close. Mila, if you're still there, would love for you to just pray for us really quickly to close.
Absolutely.
And then I'll
Yes.
hang out afterward.
Yeah, I can hang out afterwards as well, but I'm happy to close. Yeah, Father God, we thank you for tonight. Lord, we're just grateful for each one of these people that you've gathered tonight. Lord, you know them intimately and you know their journeys and know where they are at in this very moment, and you know your plans, your good plans for their lives. So, Father, I just pray that you would be guiding them and leading them as they're making decisions whether to apply for Gotham and whether that will be the next step that Jesus you have for their faith journey, but their journey altogether in life, Lord, whatever you're calling them in this season in their lives. So, Father, I pray that you would be leading them in a very concrete way. And Jesus, I just pray for every person, as we know that in this season, we all are filled with a lot of question marks and there's a lot of uncertainty. I pray that we would all recognize and know that, God, you're the same God yesterday, today, and forever. And that's a comforting factor because your plans have not changed for us. And we are living in that plan A that you have for us. And we can be comforted by the fact that you are on the throne and everything's under your control. And Jesus, from that place, we can thrive. We can be using our gifts and talents and our passions to glorify you and in ways that, Lord, you at the same time will be growing and shaping and molding us to become more and more like you. Lord, we thank you for your love for each one of us. Thank you for Vince and his passion for teaching and his willingness to guide and lead people that you place around him. And Lord, we just pray that you bless each of our night. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thanks, Mila, and thanks, Vince, and thank you all for coming. Again, free to go, but we'll hang out. If anyone has any more questions, like please feel free to ask. And if not, it's good to see you all. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, I'll hang out a little while too.
Yeah, great.
Thank you so much. It was very informational.
Thanks.
Dropping like flies.
Hey, I actually had this is Hayden again. Sorry. I just had another question.
Okay.
Well, thank you all for doing this. I was thinking more about the cost of this program. You know, it's I understand there's financial aid and whatnot, but can you just talk about the breakdown of the, let's call it like $3,250 and where it goes and things of that sort? I think that's something that I was hoping to get a little bit more color on.
Yeah, thanks for the question. You know, we always run at a loss with this program. You know, it's something that we offer, you know, to the Redeemer churches and to the neighboring churches that cost us more than it actually, you know, than we receive in income for it. But, you know, we try to make the program as cheap as humanly possible. But all of that covers each of the retreats, all of the bookings for the Saturday sessions, all of the food during those times, the accommodation. It covers the books that you'll get and receive and read throughout the program. It covers the cost of all the speakers that we pay for, renting space, just all of the printing, and it covers all of the costs that go into making the program, and then just towards CFW and us having to pay for everything that we pay for and the time, people's time. So yeah, I don't know if any of the pastors you want to jump in on that.
I think you covered pretty much it. Yeah, there's a lot of things that are included in that price tag. It seems a lot in the front end, but when you start actually looking for the different elements that are included in it, it does make sense.
Yeah, and it seems like a lot, and we've just done our best to bring that down as much as possible. And again, if this is something that will be a barrier, like, we want to have a conversation with you about financial aid. So don't let that be a barrier. I see a question: how large are the cohort sizes usually? So we break up. Right now we have 5 different cohorts. We have 2 on Sunday and we have 3 on Tuesday. I think the cohort sizes are around, correct me if I'm wrong, Mila, they're around 10 to 12 probably. So you get to know your cohort pretty intimately. You meet with them every week. You discuss what's going on, in your lives. You discuss the devotional, and then you'll come together as a Sunday and a Tuesday for the teaching. So you'll all participate in that together. But you have an hour each week with your cohort, and it's where you build the sort of the strongest relationships, I would say.
Yeah, I would just add to that each of the cohorts would have a male and female TA. So those are people who've done Gotham previously, and so they will be kind of journeying together with the cohort the whole time. So they're guiding and leading some of that prayer and sharing time, and they're involved in their whole program for the whole year as well, which is an additional kind of nice. I mean, we as a pastoral staff team, we are involved in it as well, but their TAs are in each of those cohorts, and they are always together in the cohort time.
Any other questions? Well, did someone say something?
Yeah, I did say something. Can you hear me?
Oh, we can, barely.
Yeah, that connection. I just want to say thank you. I applied last year, and I really enjoyed the entire meeting. And I just came to, I don't think I'm going to apply this year, but I just really enjoyed the meeting. I enjoyed your gentle spirit and your desire to disciple others. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Thanks for being here with us.
Vince, I'm having trouble like trying to frame this question, but this is for Vince. Can you just talk more about, like, in regards to the eschatology, like kind of heaven coming to earth, and like why we should be trying to redeem like God's creation by engaging with that?
Sure. So notice that I actually did not use the phrase redeeming God's creation, because that's not what I mean. Engagement does not mean, and I use this phrase very carefully, engagement does not mean establishing the kingdom. I'm nervous about establishing kingdom language, because that has the possibility of being understood in a triumphalistic kind of way. In my view, nobody sees clearly enough to be a triumphalist. If Paul said he sees through a glass darkly, why am I going to say, if you just came along with me, the world would be perfect, because I know exactly how everything ought to run, because God's given me this great vision. That'd be ridiculous, right? So if Paul doesn't see clearly, none of us do either. So anything that we do even if it in some ways reflects the kingdom. I like to say reflect, give glimpses of the kingdom. It's very different than saying that I'm redeeming the culture. Because I think even a phrase like redeeming the culture, whenever anybody uses that, it's very important to ask, what do they mean when they say that? So I used the word engagement when I was talking about eschatology. So I'm talking about the fact of participation in the culture and ongoing participation in the culture in terms of, at the very least, multiple ways that we love our neighbors as ourselves in the various domains of life. And that one is at least doing that in these various domains of life. And that isn't only by what we do interpersonally, but I think that can also occur through the things that we put out into the world through culture, politics, law, medicine, art, etc. So I'm always very, very nervous about the idea of us making heaven happen on earth. I think we reflect what God is going to be doing when he brings the final shalom and resolution of everything. And the thing is that there's a space between God establishing everything in the end and us doing nothing, right? Or us just being nice and saying that the things that we do have no relationship to the fact that Christ has come, the Spirit lives in us, and that we are witnesses who are made alive by the Spirit and participating in God's world. So I think in between those things, there is, in context that allow it, there's the opportunity for us to bring with us in the ways that we perceive and participate in politics, for example, and ways that we do that where we're trying to bring things that make things a little bit better, at least. A lot better would be great, but at least start with a little bit better. And the point is that I think that sometimes when Christians are hesitant about that participation, the thing I always think about is Christians should not be hesitant about participation because at least somebody around the world is always in a crisis. Somebody is. And sometimes I think there are a lot of Christians, their ways of being hesitant about political engagement reflects the fact that their lives are pretty comfortable. And they don't have to think about, living in a crisis. But there are a lot of people who do. I mean, that's one of the reasons why, one of the articles that's assigned, with the session that I do is an article that I wrote called Beyond Faithful Presence that engages James Davison Hunter's book called To Change the World. I understand why he wrote the book that he wrote, but what he proposes at the end of that book, in my view, is a great place to start, but a horrible place to end. It's a great place to end if your life is nice. It's not a great place to end if you're living in a crisis. And I think if Christians are going to participate in context of crisis, then we're thinking about how are we bringing good to those things and some dimension of transformation to those things. But transformation does not have to mean kingdom establishment. Are there Christians who use the word of kingdom establishment? Yes. Is that the view you're probably going to get in Gotham? No. And certainly you're not going to get from anything I write. So that's sort of my answer to your question. But please follow up.
No, that's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.